Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Soul Talk Radio. So, today we're going to be discussing false thoughts and how a lot of times our thoughts are lying to us. So, before we start, I feel like it's important to talk about when we have a spiritual awakening, what exactly that means. So, when people refer to a spiritual awakening, what they're talking about is the moment you realize that you are not your thoughts, right? The moment you have that separation and you're like, oh my gosh, and you realize you are the perceiver of your thoughts, you are the witness to your thoughts, you are the soul or entity who is witnessing your thoughts. It can be a very jarring and trippy experience, and sometimes even like euphoric and joyful, a spiritual experience. That's why people call it having a spiritual awakening. So when you go through that experience, a lot of times afterwards, directly afterwards, you'll realize how negative most of your thoughts are. When you become aware of the thoughts and you're actually aware of a lot of the things that your internal monologue is saying to you, and you realize how negative they are and how much a bully that ego voice can be, mostly to yourself, but also to other people as well, like judging others, judging ourselves, and also the worrisome thought cycles that it likes to spin. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about that experience of us realizing how negative those thoughts can be, and shine a little light on that topic to hopefully help us understand that our thoughts aren't factual most of the time, yet we're the one listening to that voice speak. And when it tells us things like, you're no good, we believe it because we believe that voice is who we are. However, that voice was crafted through our life experience. A lot of times that voice was created based on how our parents spoke to us, so that created our inner monologue. Or if our parents had a very self-criticizing manner, we adopted that as our own as well and became very self-criticizing. It also was formed during moments of trauma. During those moments of trauma, we created coping mechanisms, which then created some of the very negative thoughts that we're thinking, or our ability to picture worst case scenarios. So once we realize this, it becomes much easier to kind of, push aside those thoughts when we become aware that they've come up, and we can be like, but that's not actually true. It's also important to remember that we cannot stop the flow of thoughts completely. It's impossible. So to kind of help reiterate this point in this topic of today, I wanted to read a passage from my new book called Don't You Fucking Dare. Please go pick up a copy. But the passage that I'm going to be reading is from a section called False Thoughts. So it's maybe a page and a half. When we first experience a spiritual awakening, it can be jarring to realize how many of our thoughts are negative. We may then try to catch every negative thought, which is impossible, and spins us into a deeper negative thought spiral as we judge and criticize the negative thoughts themselves. One of the most important things I want you to remember on this journey is this: you will never be able to stop the flow of thoughts completely, and that's okay. Every time I explain this, I use a favorite quote of mine from Dan Harris. Side note, if you don't know who Dan Harris is, he is the news anchor who years ago had a panic attack on live TV and then tried to find something to help him with his panic attacks, and what he found was meditation and mindfulness, and then he created the app 10% Happier. I love Dan Harris. So this is the quote: "Clearing your mind is impossible unless you're enlightened. Congratulations. Or you're dead. So sorry." This always makes me laugh, but it also permits us to realize that stopping the flow of thoughts completely and at all times is next to impossible. However, simply learning that you are not those thoughts creates separation between your ego voice and your pure conscious awareness. That, in and of itself, will help create a happier life when you realize that most of the narration our ego voice is creating is false anyways. Our goal is not to silence our thoughts completely, but instead to work to quiet those thoughts over time and script new and more empowering thoughts as we do this work. So, our thoughts most of the time are not concrete, and half the time they're not even factual. So, the ego likes to create false narratives around what's going on in our lives. Again, based on, past programming, past conditioning, trauma, all of those things, and picture the worst case scenarios. It loves playing that game. But our thoughts a lot of the times are lying to us when that ego voice tells us things like, you're not good enough. I can't tell you how often when I was writing my book, sometimes I would have these really horrible thoughts like, nobody's going to read that. Who do you think you are? You're not good enough to write any of this. You're not smart enough to write any of this. Horrible things that I wouldn't say to my worst enemy, my ego voice was telling them to myself. And so I started to speak back to that voice. As often as I became aware that it was speaking to myself negatively, I started to speak back to that voice. And I used, first of all, what is called a disruptor phrase. So it's something to kind of jolt me out of that moment and out of that negative thought cycle. And then I use what I call the empowered pivots, which I'm also going to discuss in a moment. So when, your voice, when your inner monologue is telling you something like, you're not good enough, you are good enough. That voice is 100% incorrect and not factual. You are worthy. You are intrinsically worthy. There is nothing you need to do to be worthy, yet that voice tends to tell us otherwise. So this is where presence and mindfulness comes into play. And as often as we can, as often as there is awareness established that we are going down, a worrisome or judgmental thought cycle about others or about ourselves, it's interrupting those thoughts and working to shift them to a new, more positive and truthful thought. And this doesn't happen overnight. It will take some time. It takes repetition. And you're still going to have, I've talked about this before, you're still going to have those programmed thought patterns because you're thinking those same thoughts of I'm not worthy or whatever it is 10, 20, 50, 1,000 times, and a path through the forest, what I like to call it, a path through the forest is created. So those neurons are going to fire the same way moving forward. However, when we start to disrupt those negative thought cycles, we're creating new and positive neurons to walk down in the future. So a lot of times what happens now is when I catch myself judging somebody else, I'll interrupt that thought and I'm like, no, we're not doing this. You're not doing this. You're not going there. And I find myself then complimenting that person in my mind. Or another example, when I'm saying something really bad about my body when I look in the mirror, I don't do that as much anymore because my brain will immediately catch it and it will say something positive about myself. So, these thoughts can be shifted over time. It does take practice. It does take our conscious awareness of the thoughts that we are thinking. And again, you're not going to have awareness of the thoughts you are thinking 100% of the time. And that's not the goal. We're not the thought police. We're not sitting there like, oh, what thought am I thinking in every single moment? But it's when you become aware that you're thinking a very negative thought or participating in a worrisome thought cycle, a judgmental thought cycle, becoming aware, and then working to disrupt that thought, and then use one of my empowered pivots. So I want to read you guys the passages about the disruptor phrases to kind of read you a few phrases that I typically use, as well as some of my empowered pivots. So again, when I find that I'm, going down the train tracks of worry or complaint or judgment, I'll say a phrase to kind of jolt me out of that thought cycle. And the phrases include things like, stop, we're not going there. Don't you fucking dare. Don't speak to her like that. Or you don't have to think about this right now. Everything's okay. I am always protected and divinely guided. We're not doing that right now. We're not thinking about this right now. You cannot keep rehashing this. You are human and I love you. Nobody is thinking about that again except for you. I choose to release it now. And then I turn my attention to a more truthful and positive thought using the empowered pivots. So these are just some of the empowered pivots that I use. So I'll focus my attention simply on the present moment, all of the sights, sounds, and sensations that are happening in my present moment. I'll focus my attention on the birds that are singing outside, or the sound of my AC, or the sound of my breath. Breathwork is a beautiful practice to help us bring our attention back into the present moment. Another one, I'll just shift my thoughts to a more truthful and positive thought using an affirmation. If I'm having a thought like you're not good enough, I'll say, stop. We're not going there right now. We're not doing this. You are enough. You are lovely. You are wonderful. You are intrinsically worthy. So I'll shift those thoughts again using positive affirmations. Another way that I do this, another empowered pivot, is just thinking a thought of gratitude. I'll look around my room and I'll just think of something in my room that I'm grateful for. If I was doing it right now, I would say, I'm so grateful to have a computer. I'm so grateful to have a camera. I'm so grateful to have this microphone to be able to share these things with you. I'm so grateful for my mind and being able to just write this book and share it with the world. I'm so grateful for a medium of which to share it with you guys. Just looking around your room and finding just the little things that you're grateful for. Also, picturing the best possible outcome. So the mind is wonderful at picturing the worst outcome, right? But here's how I see it. If the mind is very good at picturing the worst outcome, that means we have a very vivid imagination, which is a good thing. So instead, using our imagination to picture the best case scenario. Okay, so asking yourself, no, we're not going there right now. We're not picturing the worst case scenario, and saying to yourself, what if it all worked out? What would that look like? And then taking a moment to picture that scenario. Or again, another one of the empowered pivots is just simply choosing another thought. If you find yourself going down a very judgmental thought pattern, you're judging somebody else, judging yourself, just simply snapping out of it, stop, we're not doing that, and just choosing a different thought. This is also really helpful when the mind is just simply dwelling on the past. The mind likes to bring up moments of the past that, we wish we could change, and we can't, right? We can't change the past. So it's often not helpful to keep rehashing those moments. So telling ourselves, no, we're not going there right now. We don't have to think about this right now. That's a common one that I tell myself. You don't have to think about this right now, and I choose to release it. And you might have to do it over and over. The mind likes to bring up things over and over. When it gets stuck on something, when it's worried about something from the past, it will bring up that same thing over and over. So we have to keep practicing. No, you don't have to think about this right now. I choose to release it now, and then focus your attention elsewhere. Another great way to shift our thoughts and another empowered pivot is I use mantras. So you can create a personal mantra for yourself that you can say in moments like this, like, no, I choose to be at peace. I choose to reconnect with my body, something like that. Your mantra this is another just little tip and tidbit. Affirmations are something you can share with everybody. Your personal mantra is personal. It's not something that you share with the world, right? And your mantra can change. Like sometimes I'll create a new mantra every new year or once a month or whatever. But you don't share your personal mantra with others, okay? It's just for you. I hope you found this episode helpful. All of us are dealing with this same thing where it's so beautiful in a way that we're all kind of experiencing this collective spiritual awakening right now. The world is shifting. The world is waking up from this, for lack of a better word, collective trance that we've been in, assuming that we are our thoughts. But it's so beautiful that I'm seeing the whole world kind of have this aha moment, like, okay, well, those thoughts aren't actually truthful half the time, and it's so helpful. And I've been using these disruptor phrases and these empowered pivots for years. For a long time, I didn't even have a name to describe what I was doing. But I realize now I was just, working to disrupt those thoughts and then shift them to a more empowering thought. So if you choose to share the empowered pivots with somebody else, please tag me. I would love to see the video. And hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. Again, my book, Don't You Fucking Dare, is available for purchase on Amazon. The Kindle and paperback versions are available now. The hardcover version should be available within the next week, and I'm currently working on the Audible version. But the link is below to purchase the book. And if you just search for it directly on Amazon, click on books as the subcategory and just type in my name and the book should come up. I also offer one-on-one coaching services. If you're interested in a session with me, please visit my website, meganshirey.com. I'm also a meditation instructor on the Insight Timer app. I teach there every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you'd like to join us, you can join us on the app, or I also live stream it on my Facebook page, which is also below. If you enjoy these episodes, please like, share, comment, and review. It helps us to expand this community. And as always, may you be happy, may you be well, may you be joyous and at ease, sending you infinite love and light. And until next time.